Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation in our Collegiate Recovery webinar series. My name is Olivia Pinelli and I'll be your host today. We're joined by Chantel Hammond, Certified Peer Recovery Support Specialist of RAMS in Recovery at VCU. The topic of today's presentation is making space for LGBTQI+ students in recovery. These webinars are hosted by the Association of Recovery in Higher Education in order to support the growth and development of the collegiate recovery field. Just a few reminders and logistics items before we turn things over to Chantel. Today's webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel and the ARCHRE website. You'll be able to go back and access all the information at that time. If you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the window, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Supplemental materials will be provided by the presenter, such as slides, and we can email those out to all webinar registrants after. If you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistical questions, please feel free to message us through the chat box and direct the message to all panelists if you can. We're always looking for ways to improve, topics to cover, and other feedback from our attendees. Please feel free to reach out at any time and let us know about your experience today. Now, before we turn things over to Chantel, I'm just going to give you a brief bio. Chantel Hammond uses she, her pronouns. She's a certified peer recovery support specialist, a peer recovery coach, and a person in long-term recovery. She served as an AmeriCorps member at the Richmond Healthy Future Projects at the VCU RAMS in Recovery site. In this role, she has served as a one-on-one and group mentor and coach for students in recovery, and has created content and facilitated recovery group meetings at the Recovery City Justice Centre, VCU's Outpatient Motivate Clinic, and RAMS in Recovery. Chantel is a Smart Recovery Facilitator and a Revive Master Trainer. Chantel previously attended J. Sargent Reynolds Community College, where she received her certification in substance abuse counselling. Chantel is currently pursuing her bachelor's in social work at Virginia Commonwealth University and is a proud member of RAMS in Recovery. Thanks for joining us today, and Chantel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Chantel Hammond. I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see my slides. Before we jump into this, I just want to acknowledge that some of these things might be heavy for people. Some individuals might not get everything, but this is cool. It's fine. Like, we're learning together, and this is a place to learn. And if you don't, understand anything, or some things like very new to you, I suggest that you do some searching and educate yourself on this, but also be easy on yourself, right? Because none of us know everything. And some of the things that might pop up might be things that you have done to someone else. And again, just be easy on yourself. We all make mistakes. We're all gonna mess up in life. But if anything feels uncomfortable to you, I suggest that we just set into this and process it. So I'm gonna jump into it. So I want to start off with a quote from Maya Angelou that says, "People forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And the reason why I wanted to start with that quote is because when we're talking about inclusion and building safe spaces, that is a lot more than what we do and what we say, is how we make people feel. And if an individual doesn't feel safe in your space, and your space is not safe and inclusive to them, and we have to pay attention to what we do and how people feel about the surrounding the interactions they have with us, but also how they feel when we're in their space. It's about making people feel welcome, about making them feel included and safe. Safety is the main thing for a lot of people in the LGBTQIA+ community, is being safe and feeling safe in whatever environment they're in. A quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. We're going to talk some about language and how to support people, how to be inclusive, and how harms happen and occur. The reason why I want to go over definitions about around gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, and things like that, because in order to support students, you need to understand their identities. You need to understand where they're coming from. You need to understand who they are as a person besides their struggles with a substance use disorder or mental health illness or anything like that. You need to know who they are as a person to be able to actually treat them the way that they need to be treated, but also to include them. So the acronym LGBTQ, what is that? What does those letters stand for? Actually, it's LGBTQIA+. But the reason I left the IA all for a reason, just for this slide, because of the fact that a lot of people forget about the IA and not knowing that when you don't add that to the acronym that you're excluding people who are a part of this community, right? But I also want to allow people the space to recognize that this is going to be a very colorful presentation, and the slides are very colorful. And for me, I did that purposely because within our community, we're very colorful people. We're a different array of colors. We're all individuals and we're different. And I wanted to bring that sense into my presentation. So the L is for lesbian. Lesbians are pretty much women who have physical and romantic and emotional attraction to other women. And that's pretty basic definition of what a lesbian is, and that's what the L in LGBTQIA+ stands for. And again, just to give you some knowledge that, like, when we talk about lesbians, that a trans woman could be a lesbian if she is attracted to women solely, that she can identify as a lesbian. Trans men who were their sex assigned as female and they have transitioned to a male who identify their gender identity as male, they are not lesbians if they like women, they are heterosexual. Just some things to know and remember. The G is for gay. Anyone who has a physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to someone of the same sex. And basic general term of what gay is. Bisexual is people who are physical, romantic, or emotionally attracted to someone of the same gender, but also of another gender, but also just note that a person does not have to have a sexual experience with someone of a specific gender identity in order to identify as being bisexual. The T is for transgender. So transgender individuals are, transgender, first of all, is the umbrella term, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's individuals who do not identify with the sex that was assigned to them at birth. Their gender identity differs from that. And that can look different in a lot of different ways. Individuals who are transgender, some of them go through hormone therapy. Some of them go through like different procedures and things like that, and some of them choose not to for a lot of different reasons. And someone's looks, their physical appearance does not define whether they're transgender or not. You cannot look at someone and decide their gender. So just knowing when you're in these spaces and you're interacting with people, to make sure you always ask people their pronouns. Queer is the Q, so it's an umbrella term to include pretty much the whole entire community, and it's pretty much a term that is used by particularly younger people, just as a inclusive term for everyone. It can be received as a derogatory word, so if you're not a part of this community, this is not something that you use to identify someone in this community, but it's something that you might hear from people within this community, more so particularly the younger individuals who use this as an inclusive term to refer to everyone else. Intersex is a person who is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy or chromosome pattern that is different than what's classified by the typical male or female body or sexual anatomy. And just note the word hermaphrodite is derogatory. Please do not use that to describe anyone. And an individual who is intersex or is not transgender. They can identify as transgender if the sex that they were assigned at birth is usually what happens to individuals when they're intersex. The doctor decides their gender, and thus procedures on them at a young age, not everyone, but majority of them, to decide what gender they are, and their gender identity might be different from that. And they can identify as a transgender, but intersex people are not transgender unless they identify within that group, and transgender people are not intersex unless they identify in that group. The A is for asexual. Asexual people are people who do not experience sexual attraction, and some may not experience romantic attraction. And I wanted to stop for a second and pause and think about the A, because in a lot of spaces I hear the A is for ally. And as someone who is an ally, and if you're an ally to this community, that please do not include yourself into this, because what you're doing, you're taking away the space for someone. You're erasing their gender identity, and by including yourself into this group, you're overstepping your boundary. And I wanted to acknowledge that, because in a lot of spaces I hear that A is for ally, and I want to say this. So I want to break it down like this. So if you are an ally to people who have substance use disorder who are in recovery, and because you're an ally, that doesn't give you the right. You would never go around and identify yourself as a person in recovery. So it doesn't give you a right, because you're an ally, to immerse yourself into this community. Same as like if you're a person who supports social justice and support people of color, you wouldn't go around and identify yourself as a person of color just because you're an ally to that community. The same for this community. When you do that, you're taking away a person's identity. And if an individual or a student that you're working with come into your community and they identify as this, and just that something that you see that's so simple can put a barrier in between you and that person and the help that you are trying to offer them. Talk a little bit about gender identity. So gender identity is a person's internal, deep-held sense of their gender. Simple, right? Gender identity is my personal, internal, deep-held sense of gender. And for a lot of people, like transgender people, their gender identity does not match the sex that was assigned to them at birth. Just for an example, if my sex at birth as a transgender woman, I am a transgender woman, and my sex assigned at birth was male, but my gender identity does not match that. And I identify as a female, and I am a female. So my gender identity is different from the sex assigned at birth, and gender identity, gender expression, and sex assigned at birth are all separate and different, and we're going to jump into that a little bit. So what is cisgender? Cisgender is individuals who are not trans, pretty much, basic, simple. So if your gender identity aligns with the sex you were assigned at birth, you are cisgender. If you were born, as your sex at birth was female, if the doctor said that you were a female when you were born, they assigned your sex as being female, and your gender identity is female, then you are cisgendered. Transgender is an umbrella term for people that are binary and non-binary. Okay, binary are individuals who fit into the binary construct of what gender is, and male and female. So under the binary term, there's individuals who identify as trans man and trans women. And under non-binary is a lot of different identities, as you can see. Non-binary is people who don't identify with either gender. A lot of times they find themselves in between, in the middle of identifying as a man or a woman, or some of them don't identify with gender at all, and they just identify as being a person. And these are things to kind of remember, especially when you're trying to understand people and who they are and their pronouns and things, to not misgender someone. So gender nonconforming. Let's talk a little bit about gender nonconforming. So gender nonconforming is a term used to describe some people whose gender expression is different from conventional expectations of masculine or feminine, right? Being gender nonconforming has nothing to do with your gender identity. These are just people who don't align themselves with this construct of binary gender presentation, that they can identify as a male but still dress very femme. They can identify as a female but still dress very masculine, or they can switch back and forth. They don't confine to this structure of what gender is and what it looks like through expression. People that are non-binary, which we just talked about a little bit, are people who experience their gender identity or gender expression as falling outside of the category of man and woman. Usually these individuals define themselves as falling somewhere in between men and women, or some don't fall in between there at all. They just identify as just a person, and the construct of gender, the binary way of gender of either being a man or a woman, masc or femme, does not resonate with them and who they are as a person. Gender expression. Gender expression is external and is an external manifestation of gender expressed through a person's name, pronoun, clothing, haircut, behavior, and different things like that. Your expression has nothing to do with your gender identity. It's how you express yourself, how you show up in the way you dress, the way you wear your hair and things like that. And it has nothing to do with your identity. Again, they're two separate things. So with a gender expression, a person can be very femme in the way they express themselves, the way they show up in their representation, but their gender identity can be masculine, and it's never okay to assume by a person's looks. We always say ass, never assume. So just to kind of wrap all of that up into one, we have the gender unicorn. So when we talk about gender identity, again, as you can see, the rainbow, the unicorn is thinking. So gender identity is an internal feeling of self. It's a deep internal feeling of who you are and knowing what you are. And it has nothing to do with your expression. If you can see the expression and how it's outlined of the unicorn, that's just how you show up on the outside. Your outside and insides are two different things. The way a person presents and the way that they dress and things like that has nothing to do with their gender identity. And again, sex at birth has everything to do with your sexual anatomy when you're born, whether a doctor assigns your birth as male or female. Physical attraction and emotional attraction, again, it comes from inside, it comes from your heart. It has nothing to do with your expression, your identity, and these are all separate things. Let's talk a little bit about sexual orientation. So pretty much we all pretty much know what sexual orientation is. So sexual orientation pretty much is how a person, who they relate to, who they're attracted to physically, emotionally, romantically, who they're attracted to. And it has nothing to do with their gender identity. An individual, their sexual orientation is completely different. And again, if when you're thinking about sexual orientation and people's identity, if you look at a trans woman in particular, and I'm going to use that because I use myself as a reference a lot, and I'm going to talk a lot about my own personal experience and things like that, just because it's not my place to share anyone else's experience or the things they've been through. So I use myself as a reference a lot. So if a trans woman who is solely attracted to men, and men only, so typically, like myself, they identify as a straight woman. And it has nothing to do with my sex assigned at birth. And telling that student otherwise, or acknowledging them as being gay or anything like that is taking away their identity and telling them they're not who they are. And you have immediately caused that person to shut down and check out of the situation. So just knowing these things that sexual orientation, identity, and all that stuff is different, and that a trans woman is a woman, so her identity and how she relates to people and her orientation, her sexual orientation is off of her identity as a woman, how to reference that, not to who she was before she transitioned or the sex that she was assigned at birth. I'm going to talk a little bit about language. All right. Now we're going to get into some stuff. And some of this stuff might be triggering. It might be heavy. If you find yourself triggered or heavy or things feel a little uncomfortable, I want you to take time to kind of just set it and process it and then figure out why, you know. And again, we all mess up and we all make mistakes. So language affects thoughts, beliefs, and actions. Language creates unconscious bias. Language can hinder or foster inclusivity. And when we think about building a inclusive space and a welcoming space, then we have to think about what is the actual definition of inclusion, right? What does inclusion have to do with language, right? If we want to make someone feel safe, feel welcome, and feel included within our community and our spaces, then we have to use inclusive language. We have to use language that includes these people, but language that is appropriate, safe, and not harmful. But a part of this definition I want to look at is inclusion is the act of creating environments in which an individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate, right? So when we think about inclusion, and, you know, one thing I want to point out is individual or group, right? We all are individuals, and we can't group this community as a whole. We all have different experiences and different identities that connect together. And that if an individual comes to you and say in your community that I do not feel safe or welcome or included in a lot of different ways, then that is valid, no matter if you have like 4 other people who might be involved in this community in a different aspect who say like, this is a welcoming space for me. To be truly inclusive and welcoming, that every individual in your space must feel safe, welcome, and respected and supported, right? Because we all have different identities. When I show up in these spaces, I show up in a different form as a person of color, as a trans woman, things like that, than other people who might be in this community who are not a person of color, who are cisgendered, and things like that. So when we think about inclusion, it's thinking about looking at the individual, but also looking at the group as a whole. And privilege. So privilege is unearned advantage, that advantages that are highly valued by, but restricted to certain groups, right? When we think about privilege and what does privilege have to do with language, the language is very privileged. The language that we use in a lot of spaces is very privileged. You know, how we interact with people, the things that we say, the fact that like inclusive language for a lot of people is using very masculine terms. Let's think about that privilege and how that affects students in our spaces, you know, but also the privilege of a cisgender person who doesn't have to worry about if they interact with you or talk to someone in your space being misgendered or having something say that devalues their gender identity, but also don't have to worry about like if this person has known me before I transition, are they going to say my own name? Are they going to dad name me and things like that? So when we think about this and we think about language, we have to think about and unpack the privilege surrounded around language. Again, talking about language, pronouns. Use your pronouns after your name when introducing yourself. When I introduce myself, my name is Chantel, I use she, her pronoun. When you're introducing yourself, you should do this, not just only in your community, but in everyday life. You know, I get it if you're just hanging out with your friends that you're normally around, you're not going to like say your pronouns every second, but when you're meeting someone new, you should incorporate this into the way that you introduce yourself. So it's not just performative in the spaces when you're told to do it, that it comes naturally. And when you're meeting new students, you should always say your name followed by pronouns. Why? Because if a student doesn't feel safe sharing that with an individual, or they don't know how you're going to react with them sharing this with you, you doing that first opens up a space for that person to maybe feel comfortable to be like, wow, I can share this with this person. So I don't have to worry about going into this meeting with this individual and then misgendering me the whole time. So starting with your name and introducing yourself with your pronouns opens a space for a person to feel safe and welcome. And in a little bit about preferred pronouns versus correct pronouns, we hear this a lot, and a lot of people say preferred pronouns, right? But for me and a lot of individuals in my community, when you ask us our preferred pronouns, you're saying that this is not valid. This is just what you prefer, and this is not who you are. So try to stay away from that, because some people you might not offend, but a lot of people you will offend with asking them what's their preferred pronoun. So a lot of people say preferred versus correct. For me, it's just saying, hey, my pronoun is so-and-so, what is yours? Or what pronouns do you use? Something simple and basic to make a person feel safe, but also feel welcome into introducing themselves to you. When you refer to someone and you don't know their pronouns, you say them. You say them. They, them are gender neutral pronouns. There are people, a lot of people who identify as non-binary, their pronouns are they, them. So just by using this alone will help you be more comfortable using this if someone comes to you and say, hey, these are my pronouns. But also if you don't know a person's pronouns, it's not your place to gender them. So using they, them, gender neutral pronouns to refer to someone is the correct way to do it. And also we have to talk about using gender neutral language. Again, going back to that privilege of language, this is something that we really need to break down and in these communities and revisit and think about the language that we use and think about incorporating gender neutral language, right? Because walking into a space with people and saying, hey guys, like that, or hey, you guys, can really make someone uncomfortable, especially if you have a trans woman sitting in a space with all cisgender men and you walk in the room and say, hey guys, to them, you're just devaluing their gender identity, right? And that's not what you're doing. You're like, you know, hopefully that's not what you're doing, but it's also the thing that we talked about, intent versus impact, right? Your intentions can be one thing, but the impact that you give the person, the impact of your language and your actions can affect the person a totally different way. So just thinking about breaking down the language that we use and practicing using more gender neutral language. Welcoming and inclusive language. You know, language is a lot more than just what we say. It's also the things that we do and our body motions and our body language and things like that. So a lot more than just what comes out of our mouths, but it's also the things that we do, like listening to people and actually affirming them and letting them know that we actually heard them and we listened to them. Don't interrupt an individual when they're talking to you and they're sharing things, even though some things they might be saying might make you feel uncomfortable, or they might be telling you that you heard them and you want to react. Take a second, pause. Don't interrupt that individual. That's something that I myself is still working on, because I like to jump in right away when I feel uncomfortable and state my part. None of us are perfect. Again, we're all learning together. Echo a person, attribute to the conversation, let them know that you're listening again and that you're there. Pay attention. Let your body language show that you are actually acknowledging and listening to the hurt or whatever this person is saying to you. And basically know how to pronounce people's names, right? You might not know right away, but if an individual tells you how to pronounce their name, then it's your responsibility to learn how to pronounce it, right? And the excuse of like, I never said this before or I'm learning this is not a valid excuse. As children, as babies, when we grow up, like, right, when we learn how to say things. We don't come out of our parents immediately knowing how to pronounce our name, how to pronounce their name, or any of our friends' names. It's something that we taught and we're practiced over and over. So as an adult, the excuse is like, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like, I need to take the time to value this person and who they are and learn how to pronounce their name. Because something simple as learning how to pronounce someone's name correctly in a space that majority of people probably will not say it correct, gives you the opportunity to make that person feel safe, welcome, but also open up a door that you can be maybe that one ally that that person needs to receive the help that they need. How to support these individuals, right? And I put support underrepresented students because it goes a lot farther than just the LGBTQ community. Let's talk about, like, you know, people of color and things like that. Listen, again, allow space for feedback. Don't discredit their experience. Acknowledge the emotional labor that it takes for them to show up and speak to you and tell you the things that are happening and they're hurt. Be a role model of kindness in these spaces. If you are the program director or even a student in this space, like, you can be the person to exemplify the proper way to treat someone or an individual in this space, right? You are the leader. It's up to you to show these individuals. Do not tolerate any type of hate speech. Speak up when people are hurt. Use correct pronouns, and encourage others in your community to ask first and never assume someone's pronouns, right? Show up for an individual. Show them that they can be themselves. Let them be authentic in this space. Embrace their culture. Exclude the gender norms within your community and allow people to show up the way that they want to and the way they are, right? Take action to create a safe space, right? Take harassment and violence seriously. We need to break down what we consider violence in these spaces, right? And take it a lot more serious, right? Like, physical violence is not the only form of violence. The fact that, like, if you have someone in your community who is continuously disrespecting an individual, that's a act of violence. If this person is constantly dead naming this person or misgendering them, and it's something that's continuously happening, this is an act of violence, and it should be taken seriously. Implementing policies and procedures to protect vulnerable individuals. If you don't have policies and procedures in place to protect these people, then your environment is not inclusive and welcoming, period. It's not safe, right? Because the hurt that these individuals will have to face in this environment, the violence that they're going to have to face, the discrimination from other students and peers is a lot different. And if you don't have something in place to protect these people, procedures of how to interact with these individuals, but also how to protect them, then your space is not welcoming and inclusive. We need policies and we need procedures to protect us. Consider the needs of marginalized students in your community. Consider their needs, include their needs, welcome their voices into it. Stay informed, educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. Continue to educate yourself. Hold mandatory training for all employees, that your employees should be trained. It should be mandatory. If they're not being trained on how to, like, support these individuals, but also, like, their procedures and policies of ways to protect them and to handle situations when they happen, then your space is not inclusive. Encourage your community members to educate themselves, right? Because if your students are not participating in this environment but making it safe and inclusive, then your community is not safe and inclusive, right? If the peers in this space don't know how to include this person, don't know how to support them, know how to use the proper language, then no matter what work the employees do, that, like, that space is not going to be safe and welcoming. That is just not your place to make this place safe and welcoming. You are the leader, so you do set the example, but you should encourage your community members to also encourage and to educate themselves. Recognize that the job of marginalized individuals is not to educate you. It is not our job to educate you. It's not the job of your students when they come into this space to tell you that your space is unsafe. This is why it's unsafe. This is what you need to change. This is what you need to fix. To educate you on language and stuff. They're there to access a service like all other students. They should not have to come into this space and educate you on how to provide that service to them. It's not their job. It is your job. If you're the program director, if you're an employee there, it's your job to do this. It's not their job. And how to be inclusive, right? One, honor pronouns again. Honor pronouns, names, gender identity, expression, do not assume as. Support different pathways of recovery, right? There's no one pathway to recovery, and we have to support everyone. Make representation a priority. Hire staff that reflect your community values, right? Develop cultural competency. Educate yourself, educate your staff, offer trainings for your community members. Again, if your students in your community are not welcoming and inclusive and don't know how to support these individuals, then your space is not welcoming and inclusive, and it's not safe for these individuals, and it's not fair for you to bring them into this space with other students that are going to hurt them. Be kind and welcoming. Again, show compassion, lead with kindness, embrace new students, help students connect with others in the community. Again, ask respectfully for a person's pronouns and commit to using them. Refer to a person only by their current identity. Don't bring up their old identity, even if you knew them before they transitioned. It's not your place to talk about this or to bring that up. Correct yourself if you use the wrong name and pronouns. Avoid the words like real, regular, and normal when you're talking to transgender individuals about their gender identity. Your trans friend is not as pretty as a real woman. She is a real woman. She is a beautiful woman, right? Understand you'll make mistakes. Be open and receptive to feedback from trans people about how your language makes them feel. Don't make an assumption about how someone would like to be referred to. Again, ask. Don't ask about a person's like genitals or anything like that, or like ask them about surgeries or are they going to get surgeries and things like that. Things like this seem like they're not a problem, but as a person within collegiate recovery programs and settings, that these are things that I get asked a lot by other people and students and also employees and things like that. So it's none of your business what that individual is going through and what they might do. If they don't come and share this with you, then it's not your place to ask them about their own personal experience, right? Don't explain a person by their previous identity. Again, this is called dead naming, when you bring up someone who they were before they transition, calling them by their own name, their old name, or referring to them by their pronouns before they transition and things like that is very hurtful, harmful, and what you're doing, you're invalidating a person's identity. Do not do that. Don't out a person. It's not your place to tell someone a person's previous name or their previous gender, or to say, oh, this person, blah, 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 like this is Chantel, she's a trans one. Like that's not your place to out me or tell anyone that I am trans or anyone else, but that is our place to introduce ourselves like that if we choose to. Do not tell other people. Again, dead naming, calling a student by their birth name, not their chosen name. Even if you know it, it's not your place to say it. Not responding, intervening when are naming an action, right? What harms people? This is how harms happen, right? Deflecting responsibility, not correcting individuals when they misgender someone in your community, and not accepting responsibility when you make mistakes. Displaying or tolerating microaggressions. We all know what microaggressions is, but I don't have to go into that. I hope not. If you don't know what microaggressions is, do some research, educate yourself, but also defending harmful behavior, justifying harmful actions, minimizing an individual's experience, not calling people out when they exhibit harmful behaviors, right? All these are harmful behaviors. And the reason why I say calling out, because if someone is exhibiting harmful behaviors, calling them in is doing nothing but protecting the person who is causing harm. They need to be called out and also set in the harm that they're doing, right? So there's a short video that I want to show y'all, and this is called Ask Me, and I hope everyone can show you. Okay. Well, the video's not working. I can't get it to play. So anyways, just to kind of go back, I'm going to go back over this part because I kind of went through it really fast and share some examples with you. So when we're talking about causing harm and things like that, right? So when we talk about deflecting things and putting the harm on other people, I want to share a personal story with you since I can't let you hear the personal stories of students who have been affected and institution of higher education by, transphobic comments or homophobic things. So deflecting a responsibility, but also not correcting other people when they do harm. So I took this trip like a year ago. And again, let me preface this before I share this. This is not to be vicious towards anyone. This is not to call anyone out. This is not to hurt anyone or make anyone feel like bad about themselves, but this is just bringing awareness to a situation. And like, again, I only share situations that happen to me because it's not my place to share other people's like experiences, right? I can only talk for myself. So I went on this trip like a year ago with my CRP, but also a couple other CRPs. We went on this trip to Florida. So during this trip, as a person who, like, my pronouns are important, my pronouns weren't being honored. And, being a person who's outspoken, who speaks up about these things, and we talked about it a lot. That like it was a conversation, a constant conversation, because I believe in like not backing down when it comes to my respect. So not taking responsibility. I was, made to feel like I was messing up everyone else's experience because I couldn't just set in the discomfort of people misgendering me. But also that, like, some people are just learning and they need time to continue to learn, that I should just be okay with it and set with it. But also, let's talk about deflecting the responsibility. So how was the responsibility deflected on me, right? So after this trip, we go home and I meet with the program director of my CRP at that moment of time, and we talked about this. Okay, let's preference. The intent was good. The intent was to, like, help me and things like that. But the outcome and the impact didn't go that way. But we're talking about deflecting on individuals, right? So what happened was, in this conversation, we were talking about things and how to move forward for this. I was asked, like, was I going to start dressing more feminine? Was I going to start dressing more like a woman and things like this? And in this moment in time, I was very deep in my transition, and I was still figuring things out in my life, and it caught me off guard. But what was said after that is really what I'm talking about. I was told that, like, if I do this, that I will make it easier for the people in my community to use my correct pronouns. But they might look at me weird, but it will probably make it easier for them to use my correct pronouns, right? And let's think about this, how that responsibility was deflected on me as a person who was experiencing hurt and harm. By telling you that, like, it was deflected on me, that, like, I need to change to make other people comfortable, that I need to take the responsibility to change the situation for those who are uneducated instead of educating themselves. So the responsibility of fixing the situation was on me to change who I am, to be able to not make other people uncomfortable. And these are things that we don't want to walk into when we are helping individuals, when we are trying to offer support, deflecting the responsibility on them to fix a problem when other individuals are hurting them. So thanks for letting me share, and that's all I got for this webinar. You guys are awesome.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I wonder if we've got a few minutes, 15 minutes to answer any questions. If you do have any, could you put some in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will select some. Let me know if you have anything you want to ask. I might ask you if there's anything that has come up, Chantel, during the presentation that you want to add.
For me, the only thing I would like to add is that that we have to do more work around this. That, like, this is just not a one-time isolated conversation, and all this stuff has to be broken down in a lot of different, subgroups. Like, we have to, like, look at gender identity and things like that separate, and actually talk about that and have that discussion and get an understanding of what that means by itself. But then we also need to have a discussion of, like, how to actually support people, because the basic things that we are doing is not enough, right? And a lot of these are just basic things that we're told to do. Like, we put a lot of emphasis on asking people their pronouns or using people's correct pronouns. And a lot of spaces that I have been in, that just the fact that like someone will use their pronouns is enough for them to say that this place is welcoming and inclusive, but it's not. It's like scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? And these are things that like, these are just basic things that we should do, but also knowing that like, we really need to dissect this thing in a lot of different ways and really talk about it. And it's not a one-shot thing, right? And also we need to really, really, really focus on the language that we use. The language that we use makes a very big difference. It's a very big impact on how people perceive things, how people feel, how people engage with you. Like, we really need to dissect the fact, the privilege around language, the privilege around masculine language in our communities. Like, and how to make our language a lot more inclusive, but also culturally diverse, because it's not just about like LGBTQ people, it's also about people of color and the language that we use. How does that affect them? Because like for me, like all those things intersect with each other. Like, I can't talk about my gender identity without talking about my ethnicity and my race, because like, when I walk in the door, both people notice both things right away. And they're both intersecting, and they both are my most dominant features that people recognize right away.
And I've got another question. How can we support LGBTQIA+ individuals who have a lack of familial support?
Right. Educate yourself. Ask them what they need. Include them, right? When they come into your space and when they're looking for help, it's not about at that moment of time, right? We can look at like, oh, they don't have the support of their family. And like, how do we help them without having the support of their family? At that moment of time, you are their family. Like, a lot of people get into recovery, their recovery community is their family, right? So it's like embracing them and being that person's new family in a respectful way, not putting them through the same harm and triggers that their family their birth family has done to them, right? So that's all about changing, educating ourselves, knowing what we're doing, knowing how we're interacting with people, knowing what people need, right? Because we can't give everyone this basic level of support, because when you give this person the basic level of support, what you're doing is giving them the basic level of support of white, cisgender, heterosexual people of privilege. You're giving them the support that they need, not the actual support that this individual needs, right? When you think about it in that moment of time, think about who that person is. Everyone needs individual support. So it's like, not like, we can't group everyone together and be like, this is what they need. I always say, ask people what they need, embrace what they need, and truly be open to give them the support that they need and try to understand it. Because, right, we can ask people, but like, if we're not truly like ready to give them the support that we need, then just asking them is a lot more harmful than not asking if we don't follow through.
Yeah. Another question we have is, how can we address issues such as not having sanitary product receptacles in male bathrooms for male transgender individuals?
I'm sorry, well, can you repeat that?
How can we address issues such as not having sanitary product receptacles in male bathrooms for male transgender individuals?
Okay, so if it's within your space and you have control over this space, then you have control of what's like, supplied in those bathrooms. Like, you have control over what's put in those bathrooms, right? Like, you can put those in there, right? You can supply those, especially if it's within, I don't know if everyone is like, have their own collegiate recovery space, if everyone's part of collegiate recovery, but if you have your own space, you're in charge of that bathroom. So you're in charge of what goes into that. And if not, if it's like on a broader scale within your university, you as a person of privilege, you do not have to experience this should be reaching out to the administrators and advocating for that to be in the bathroom for these individuals. And if it's not in there, you can provide it in your space. So if they need it, they can always come there and use the bathroom safely, but also come and get the supplies that they need.
Yeah. How has your program director responded since the incident? Have they been able to educate themselves towards healing?
I can't.
If you feel comfortable answering that.
Great. All right. So I choose my words very carefully because, again, this is not to personally attack this individual, because I believe in that moment of time. And, you know, there's been a lot of other hurt that happened. I caused a lot of hurt. None of us are perfect, right? But in that moment of time, that individual was like doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had, right? And they're like, what they were doing in that moment of time was trying to be helpful to me, right? So I don't want to bash this individual, and I don't want to seem like I'm bashing them because their intent was to help me. Their intent was to provide a safe space for me and try to figure out, right? It didn't happen that way, but their intent was there, right? So I can't speak on what they have done personally to educate themselves. You know, that's internal work that they're doing. And honestly, that's none of my business what they do outside of the space that we interact with together. But yeah, so I can't really speak on what this individual has done. But I did name the fact that, like, you know, this thing was hurtful and harmful, and we have talked about it. We have had conversations about it, and they understand why that was hurtful and things like that. And like, yes, like there's growth in communication, but I can't speak on this individual's personal like work and things like that because it's just not my place to do. So yeah.
Thank you. What are beneficial resources we can do our research through?
There's a lot of resources, right?
Google.
You know, Google, right? That's what I was gonna say. Google, like anything else, like when we research things, we Google it, right? We can reach out to other professionals in the field who maybe like specialize in things like this. Reach out to resources on your campus that have resources that offer like, you know, trainings and stuff around this. Ask them for like, you know, resources. What should they do? Different things like that. You know, YouTube, Google videos on YouTube, specific subjects. Everything is not helpful, but you can find a lot of things on there. There's books surrounding ways to, like, there's so much knowledge out there, but we have to use the same resources that we use to research, like, substance use disorder and how to support these individuals and things like that, to actually, like, research how to do this support, right? Because, like, you know, we have to do the work. We know how to do the work. We know how to find resources. We know how to find resources around the things that we're passionate about. So we have to use those same resources and those same skills to research other things, right? And another thing about it is actually being passionate about learning how to do this, not doing it to check off a mark, right? Because if you're doing it just to check off a mark and not be passionate about it, then like you're going to do the bare minimum, right? Really find some passion behind this and really want to help these individuals.
Yeah, and I noticed that there were you listed a few websites within your presentation. We can send those, if you feel comfortable, we could send those slides out to participants afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. And maybe we could write a blog together on that, maybe at some point, to have specific resources. The next question, do you have any tips for supporting sober students, specifically in queer and trans spaces?
Again, like supporting them, like asking them what they need, like any other student, treating them with respect, offering them a safe, welcoming space, right? Because that's what everyone needs. Like we come into these spaces expecting to have a space that we feel safe, welcome. We feel okay to be in. We feel like we're getting the support that we need. Ask them what they need. Ask them what support is not missing. Listen to it. Actually provide the support. But, you know, also like things like this, if you provide like recovery meetings on campus, ask them, do they want a recovery meeting specifically for that identity so they can meet with other people and share things that they might not feel okay sharing with other people. You know, it's by providing them the same access to resources that you're providing everyone else. And that might look different, but the only way you can truly know what people or what students want and need is by asking them and actually listening and providing a space so they can give you actual feedback without judgment, without feeling like they're going to be attacked or a lot of things like that. Just like actual feedback, listen to them, but actually provide the sources and the resources that they ask for. Like, don't just ask them and ask them to put in all this emotional labor with sharing their personal experience and things that they need and then doing absolutely nothing to change the structure. Like, ask them, follow up, do what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got time for one more question, which is it helpful to have stickers, posters, etc., that establish somewhere as a safe space?
No. No. For me personally, no. The stickers mean nothing. Like the stickers, the posters, and all that stuff, that's just propaganda. That means nothing. That does not make a safe space. That does not make a safe feel safe. I've been in a lot of spaces that have like stickers, and a lot of people sit down with a lot of people in their office and talk to them and things like that, and they have stickers like, I support LGBTQIA plus people. I'm an ally. I've taken this safe film training to be like able to support these individuals, and then you sit down with them and they're the most like triggering people that you've ever talked to. Like stickers, posts, none of that stuff mean nothing. It's like what you actually do, right? Like all that stuff is cool to say, hey, we support you and stuff, and it might make someone feel more comfortable with like stepping into the space. But if you don't have the actions to follow behind that, then that shit means nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you have to, the stickers and stuff mean nothing. Like it's about what you do.
Yeah.
It's like what you do and what you bring to the table.
Actions are powerful.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. We hope that this session was useful and that you'll share it with colleagues and students. Stay connected with ARHE to learn about future webinars and let us know how we can improve our offerings. Chantel, thank you for taking the time today to present to our attendees. We appreciate everyone's time, and we hope to see some of you on our next webinar, which will be next Wednesday, the 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Jamie Marich on practical skills for navigating trauma. Thank you for joining and take care.